la traducción en français, and we also have tenemos la traducción en español. And we're recording. We hope we have your permission for that. So let's get into the panel, because we have 6 panelists for you. We have an extremely distinguished set of panelists that go all the way from broad global overviews to working on the ground on the SDG indicators on land and what they mean. And so I don't want to take away from the richness of what we're going to hear from the panelists. And we're going to start with a very eminent commentator on poverty, on food systems. I'm pleased to see you, Olivier. Thank you very much for coming back and joining us again. Olivier, I'm sure you all know him, former Special Rapporteur on the right to food, current Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty, and a member of the EPES food group. EPES Foods recently put out a paper called The Land Squeeze, on looking at the sort of land grab 2.0 and the implications on food systems, and is really one of the commentators that challenges to the fundamentals of what economic growth means, what the human rights implications are, and what alternatives can we imagine. Olivier, it's great to see you, and it's really a huge privilege for us to have you on this panel. Thank you for making the time. I'm sure this is an extremely demanding week for you with a high-level forum going on, but we appreciate you taking the time to come and be with us. We have 2 questions for you based on your own background, your own work, your own engagement as a Special Rapporteur, as well as the work that you've been doing as co-chair of EPES Food. And those questions are, firstly, what you see as the current threats, the particular threats at this moment of history, and the many changes our world has gone through, particularly over the last 5 years or decades since we saw the last land grab accelerating. What are the current threats to the land rights of people around the world, and what some implications of those threats might be? Thank you for joining us, Olivier, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for these very kind introductory words. And I would like to express my gratitude towards the International Land Coalition for convening this important discussion. When I was the Special Rapporteur on the right to food, we did witness a first wave of land grabs at the time. This was in the years 2008, 2010. And that was driven by the fears of agri-food companies and indeed countries that the markets would be less and less reliable, that the prices for agricultural commodities would be more and more volatile, and by a pressure on land resulting from the need to produce agrofuels in large volumes, given that the prices of energy were going up, and that there was a need to find alternatives to fossil fuels. And we had thought, naively perhaps, after that first wave of land grabs, that things would become much more stable, and that countries, having realized that these pressures on land were resulting in a global land grab, that they would take the necessary measures to avoid this repeating itself. However, we are now witnessing a second wave of land grabs in a context in which access to land is still highly unequal. The statistics that IPES Food presents in its Land Squeeze report, published just a few weeks ago, is that 1% of the world's largest farms now control 70% of the world's farmland. In Latin America, 10% of the large farms control 75% of the land, and the smaller 55% of farms occupy only 3% of the land. This is, of course, largely the result of the colonial patterns of domination and how the settlers had essentially monopolized access to land to the detriment of the indigenous populations. And yes, the land grabs are continuing. We have some ways by which this can be described since 2000, since 25 years almost. About twice the size of Germany has been snatched from local land users through transnational deals, through foreign direct investment or through sovereign wealth funds, for example. And we have today some 963 active funds specialized in food and agricultural assets that manage over 150 billion US dollars, and for whom land is becoming an economic asset on which they can speculate and that are driving prices up. In fact, the role of these agricultural investment funds has been significantly increasing over the past 10 to 15 years. The agricultural investment funds rose tenfold between 2005 and 2018. Now, Michael, you asked why this new wave of land grabs was taking place. What is new in the situation we are witnessing today? I think the single most important driver today has become the carbon credits that investors can claim once they have land under their control. Think about this. Governments' pledges for land-based carbon removals in the successive COPs under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, these pledges add up to almost 1.2 billion hectares of land, equivalent to the current global cropland. In other terms, governments have committed to dedicate to developing into carbon sinks surfaces of land that are equivalent to the land that is cultivated today. Green grabs for carbon credits now account for 20% of transnational land deals, so it's a major driver in recent times, as important as the fear that markets will be less reliable, that for the future food security of populations, countries should have access to the resources and agrofuels, which were the most important drivers in the past. Many of these carbon removal pledges will interfere with small-scale farmers and indigenous peoples' access to land, and it is expected that this will continue. Our estimate is that carbon offset markets will quadruple, will increase fourfold in the next 7 years. And already the market for carbon credits is $414 billion US dollars, and this will rise significantly in the next few years, as I was mentioning. Now, there are impacts to this, particularly the rise of prices, but also impacts, paradoxically perhaps, on the environment, which we may wish to return to later. Thank you very much, Michael. I look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Olivier. As always, cutting and clear and straight to the point, and a really great start to lay the foundation for our discussion. So we're going to go straight over to our next speaker, Diana from Landesa. I've had the pleasure of working closely with Diana for quite a few years on thinking about indicators for the land on land at a time when there were very few indicators in global frameworks, and we've been successful in getting them in there. But when we look at the stats, it's unfortunately not very good, is it, Diana? I think we only have 12% of countries reporting on 1.4.2. And so it seems that countries, for some reason, not wanting to report at the same time as we see a lot of drivers possibly taking countries in the opposite direction as to what Olivier has just outlined for us. So Diana, please take the floor and give us a sense of of how well countries are doing according to the commitments they've made. So we had all countries commit to those targets. How are we just over halfway through the SDG period in actually reaching those targets? Over to you.
Wonderful. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's great to see so many friendly faces here. I assume I'm talking to the converted. We're all understanding the importance of land rights, and Oliver just gave us a sense of how dire the situation is from even one perspective, right? So many of us worked on this, on the inclusion on land rights in the SDGs, and at the time, we thought this was going to be transformational. It moved the needle dramatically in at least three ways. First of all, just the focus on land and land rights, and the idea that it had to be a comprehensive type of intervention at a major scale, multi-sectoral, and deliberate. The other piece was that it very clearly emphasized women's land rights, and the idea that if we wanted to achieve the development goals, we needed to put that front and center. And the third major jump or potential jump from my perspective was the emphasis on data on land rights. As we all know, that was a huge void, and the idea was that this highly visible platform was going to help us get into concerted efforts to start collecting systemically data that told us about people, not about farms and not about the economy, but just how people were doing in terms of their tenure security, their land rights. And to do that, also paying attention to women, as I mentioned earlier. I have 7 minutes. I can use just one and say we have done so little of what we need to see happen. The progress today has been utterly insufficient. So I will say a few more words, but that's the key line that we have to walk away with. This is a tremendous opportunity. The bar was very high, but we have moved very little. And so if we could use the SDGs to push things a bit more, this is the time to do it. And the closing years of the agenda would be the best moment to use that energy. So I'm here representing the SDG Land Momentum Group. We're a group of organizations that were precisely trying to help use the SDG commitment to advance land rights. And one way in which we decided to do that was by issuing annual reports describing the progress that had been made. And the idea was we will celebrate governments that have been doing taking significant actions. And we were also going to see how we can, sorry, I got a new puppy here that is very interested in what we're talking about. And we were also going to call on how significant the actions were or were not. For that, we use publicly available information. A key source of what we're using are the voluntary national reports, emphasis on voluntary. This is the report that governments use to showcase what they're doing. They're choosing what to say and how to say. We're not evaluating the truth or the magnitude of their comments. We looked at what they said and then looked at whether they mentioned land and they mentioned some significant action on land and an action that was inclusive in some way, right? That moved towards the goals of the SDGs. I am extremely sad to say that the number of countries who have reported any action is very, very small. In this year's or in 2023 VNRs, which is what we're looking at now, only 2 countries mentioned doing something significant on land. And these 2 countries are Rwanda and Zambia. Rwanda advancing legislation on marriage and inheritance, and Zambia advancing their national land policy. This doesn't mean that other countries were not doing anything on land, but they were either not doing enough or were not thinking this was important enough to put it in the report. So there's tons of work for us to do wherever we sit. We need to make land rights a central focus of the work, and we need to make sure that action actually happens. In previous years, there were a few more countries reporting. We're talking about 15 countries in one year, 22 countries in another, but this is still a really small number of countries, and the action that they're reporting is nowhere close to closing the gap on tenure rights. And so let's be clear here, progress has been made, is absolutely not sufficient to get us close to our intended goal. We can also look at the data, and we have 3 indicators that we use for that. Indicator 142, indicator 5A1, and indicator 5A2. And we have representatives here who can give us more detail later. But the reality is that also on that front, there has been just very little reporting. We are all aware of how long it takes to create data. We were not expecting miracles here. But the reality is that we still have little data. We have not seen official additions to the SDG database in the past 6 years. And for countries who have reported data, usually they've only reported once. And so obviously we cannot use that to track progress. For those who have reported, the numbers, with the exception of South Korea and Rwanda, the numbers tend to be quite low. And so something like 50% of the population lack documentation to prove their rights. And the problems are also dire, of course, in the rural areas, and even more so for women. We have representatives here, both of the custodians and of other efforts to gather data, so I won't go into this in long detail, but it means that we also have to continue the support on these efforts on all fronts: resources, political commitment, technical advice, and also using the data to make the case for how wide this gap is. And I will end this piece of it with a positive note. While we're extremely far from reaching our targets, we are making some significant progress, particularly on the converging of how we use data for land rights. These indicators have been used by a number of global initiatives. Again, we have an example here on the line. We also have, so that's Sprindex. We also have the Women's Empowerment Index. We also see the Living Standards survey and so forth. And it has been used at the national level for some projects that evaluate land governance, many of these in countries in Africa. So things have happened. We are converging. We have tools to help us with that. That's all fantastic. We still have a lot of work to do. And we have a lot of work to do both on land rights as well as on feeding whatever is being done back to the SDG platform, so that we can use that platform, that voice, that momentum to advance where land rights need to be advanced, if we want to ensure that everybody can one day in the not so distant future say that they have secure tenure rights to land. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, for that really clear overview from the SDG Land Momentum Group, and congratulations to the SDG Land Momentum Group for the excellent work you've been doing in the face of great challenges. Who knows how much worse it may have been if it wasn't for the very strong pushing that your group has been making. So we're going to pivot in a moment to zoom in on the data and the collection of data. But before we do that, I'd just like to go off script a bit and go back to Olivier, because I think we've understood from what you've heard so far that the drivers are pulling in the wrong direction. The reporting is not going as we had hoped. But I think it's important that we understand what are the implications of what we see. So we have under SDG 1, ending poverty in all its forms, and SDG 5 on agriculture, land indicators. If those land indicators are not being met because of our failure to secure land rights, what are the implications of that? Olivier, could you just take a couple of minutes to try and give us the sort of sense of where we're headed if we're not able to turn this around?
Yes, thank you, Michael, and thank you to Diana for this very impressive overview of what we are not able to achieve despite the pledges made in the SDGs and the failure of states to really report on the efforts that they make. I would like to maybe highlight that this situation has two major implications. The first one, of course, is that we are witnessing the arrival on the markets for land rights of very powerful financial actors, investment funds, hedge funds, pension funds, that are driving prices up in very significant proportions. In a period of about 13 years, between 2008 and 2022, the land prices globally doubled. In Europe, they tripled. In the UK, we witnessed over a period of 5 years only, between 2010 and 2015, a doubling of farmland prices. And we have in all world regions land that is becoming a financial asset as any other, subject to speculation in a global auctioning process in which these financial actors are playing an increasingly important role. The result, of course, is that for a young generation of farmers, it is very difficult to have access to land in order to start farming, unless they accept to incur debts for 25 or 30 years. And that for many local land users, the small campesinos, the peasants, pastoralists, indigenous people, they cannot rely on access to land as a source of livelihood options because they simply are unable to compete with these major players that have now entered into these markets. Speculation is really driving off from access to resources those groups of the population that are today the most affected by poverty. We have a situation globally in which about 750 million people live in extreme poverty, and the majority of them are people living in rural areas depending on access to land for their livelihoods, and they are increasingly squeezed out from this access. Many countries have reacted by rolling out titling schemes, providing deeds, legal titles to land users so that they should be able to resist being evicted and expropriated from the land. But the result of these titling schemes has all too often been that land that was not in the past an asset that could be traded is now subject to the laws of supply and demand. And that speculation has increased, in fact, facilitated by this commodification of land that we have witnessed as a result of these titling schemes. The second major impact is that many of these investments by these big players are actually contributing to the global degradation of soil health. 40% of the world's land is degrading. The health of soils and the ability for soils to function as carbon sinks is being diminished as a result. And you may have seen that UNESCO is expressing now a concern about this and offers to develop a database to look at the quality of the soils globally, because that is indeed one major threat to our future ability to feed the world and also to our ability to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Many of the land grabs we've witnessed are intended for water-intensive crop production, and a very significant proportion of these investments are in regions of high biodiversity. So biodiversity is being further eroded as a result of these investments taking place in general for large-scale monocultures in order to satisfy the thirst of global markets. So these are the major implications I see, and that is why the work done by the International Land Coalition and others is so important in securing equitable access to land rights for the populations that most depend on them for their livelihoods.
Thank you, Olivier. I think quite a sobering analysis of where we stand right now and what the implications are on hunger, poverty, and really good down to human rights, down to the ability of people to live a dignified life in rural areas. So with that understanding and that background, we're going to pivot over to two speakers who are going to take us through the data side. So how we actually get the data into the public realm, how we collect the data and how we get it into the public realm in terms of understanding what kind of progress we're making towards the commitments of state parties in the SDGs. Considering that state parties are not reporting, from as Diana told us, we're very privileged to have Malcolm Childress, who has been working alongside many members of ILC on developing, to my knowledge, the most comprehensive data set that exists on land rights, which is Prindex, and it would be good to hear from you, Malcolm, a bit about what Prindex is, what Prindex tells us, and therefore what's the contribution that Prindex can make in understanding progress towards the SDGs in the absence of official reporting. Over to you, Malcolm.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mike. Hello, everybody. Indeed, really sobering reflections from Olivier and from Diana. Thanks for starting my slides. Let's go to the next one. And indeed, you know, I think the people here were very involved in trying to get land into the SDG framework, and ILC has taken such a protagonistic role in that. And I think at the time that started, there's been you know, a real thought that what gets measured gets changed. Let's raise the profile of land tenure, security, access, and keep it up high and burning on the international development policy agenda. But there's been a real a lack of data. So I think we tried with this initiative of Prindex to sort of jumpstart a data collection process. So the intention is to have globally comparable data on citizens' perception of tenure security from 140 countries, and to, in a sense, this is too important to wait for all of the countries. We recognize that that's slow. It requires for countries' official systems to bring in new questions. That's expensive. It's complicated. The intention of Prindex has been to try to create an alternative source of data that is relatively general and very specific to this perception of tenure security, which corresponds to the 1.4.2b, and get it out into the discourse so that we can be oriented on the data. Next slide, please. And the first round of data was collected on the Gallup World Poll in 2019. I think it was really revealing. The headline result of that is nearly 1 in 5 adults globally feel that they are either somewhat likely or very likely to lose their home or other property against their will within the next 5 years. So this is a serious threat, and I think tracks alongside with what Olivier and Diana have been talking about. And I would mention that this is both urban and rural. How do we do this? The next slide, please, is it's a simple methodology focusing really only on the tenure itself and a few related variables. We work through a module on the Gallup World Poll, and this is scientific sampling. The current data set covers 140 countries, which corresponds to 96% of the global population. 168,000 people aged over 18 were interviewed for that. We're now coming in with the second round of Prindex from data collected in 2023, which will bring our overall sample up to over 250,000 observations. And we use this tenure security metric about how likely or unlikely you could lose the right to use this property or part of this property against your will. Let's go to the next slide. The results so far show, some real regional variation, with the highest levels of insecurity occurring in Sub-Saharan Africa and in Middle East and the North Africa. South Asia and Latin America are slightly above the average, and then East Asia, Europe, and North America slightly below the average. Although I would point out that these results also show that there are significant parts of the population in every global region experiencing this insecurity. And next slide. And we do disaggregate in Prindex by gender, and we even ask some questions aimed at drawing out gender differences, particularly questions about perception of insecurity in the event of a spousal death or a divorce in the family. And in that metric, we do see these gender differences, in fact, quite marked in places, especially in the Middle East and in Sub-Saharan Africa, which just adds empirical weight and confirmation at a country level to what we know are the gender differences and the gender agenda continuing in those regions, particularly. Next slide. The Prindex data we ask a few questions about the reasons, and I think these tend to cluster around things which could very much be related to what Olivier has been talking about affordability and about access. But it's very much tied to the household conditions and the conditions of the individual within the household. And then there are also people who perceive these external threats from governments or external actors. Next slide. So I just want to leave it there. The Prindex data is publicly available on the website prindex.net for researchers, countries, ministries, whoever would like to use it. A new round will be coming up later this year. And this, I think, represents how alternative data can at least partially fill the gaps until more robust official statistics and more robust local knowledge becomes available to policymakers. So that's really, I think, the value proposition of these data at this moment. Thanks. Back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Malcolm. So in a second, we're going to go over to one of the official custodians of the SDG indicators on land. But if it's okay, Malcolm, I just want you to comment in a minute, if you could, on the idea that if it doesn't come from an official agency, it's not reliable. So you've worked at consolidating this massive data set. How do you counter the argument that citizen generated data or third-party data is not reliable?
Well, if you want me to answer that right now, this Gallup World Poll is a well-regarded It's used for official purposes. The land module is only one small part of this data set. The sampling is used for many purposes by official and other actors around the world, and several of the other SDGs, in fact, are reporting using the same data set. So there's really, to my mind, this is sufficient for a nationally representative sample indicator. There are, of course, limitations to how fine-grained the representativity is. And so there, like any data set, there are limitations, but these data are being used from the same data set for SDGs and for other purposes all over the world. So we think these are very robust numbers to put up.
Thank you, and congratulations to Prendex. I think this is really for the land community an incredibly important set of information that you provide. We're going to come back again after the next speaker, back to citizen-led data, but we're very fortunate to have with us two people from. We have several people from FAO, but I'm going to give the floor to two of them. FAO is the custodian agency for SDG 5A1 and 5A2. So we have Veronica Boero, who's from the statistics division of FAO, and we have Muriel Feldman, who's from the rural transformation and gender equity division of FAO. So over to the two of you, and it would be helpful for us to get an idea from you as the custodian agency for those two land indicators, and I guess you work closely also with the World Bank on 1.4.2. What is the status in gathering official data for those indicators? What are your projections on whether we can do better than what we already heard from Diana? And what are some of the challenges you foresee to doing better over the next 6 years? On those indicators, and if you could also give us an idea of why countries over the next 6 years, what incentives are there for countries to do a better job on reporting on the land indicators? So thank you, Veronica and Muriel, and over to you.
Thank you, Michael. Should I share my screen?
If Rukhsana has your presentation, he will do it. Otherwise, okay, please do it yourself.
Thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure to take part in this discussion, and we're pleased to be giving you an overview of where we stand with the reporting on the SDGs. This on behalf of the entire team. So it's just me and Veronica presenting, but our colleagues are here and happy to answer any questions that you may have. Next slide, please. So the key points I want to highlight are the following. So there is progress. We've heard a bit depressing picture, but there's also been a lot of progress considering that before 2015, no data was systematically collected on these topics. So it's great to have these indicators included in the SDG agenda, and we see a lot of progress. However, protections of women's land rights remain a major global challenge, and this includes all the vulnerable groups mentioned by Mr. de Schutter. And then there are some clear pathways we see towards improving reporting, dissemination, and action. And the main recommendation here is that we have to collaborate, whether it's with civil society organizations, governments, or third parties like Malcolm and other institutions. Next, please. Next. Thanks. So for SDG 142, which measures the proportion of adult population with secure tenure rights to land, with either legally recognized documentation or who perceive their rights to land as secure, progress has been relatively more slow than for the other indicators. So there's 33 on sub-indicator A and 22 countries reporting on indicator B. For 5A1, there's 49 reporting countries. And for 5A2, progress is a bit more advanced. So we have 80 countries that have submitted official data on this indicator. And the main challenges, it has been mentioned already, but there's limited data available. Countries tend to not, it's difficult to convince countries of the importance of these indicators if they have, for instance, national statistic offices can point to constitutional provisions on gender equality and the right to ownership and say there's no concerns. So it takes a lot of efforts to explain why it's still relevant to collect this data. And of course, the political sensitivity of this data. And there's major financial and technical constraints. So countries need to report themselves, and often this is very good. Next slide, please. So here we want to show you a projection of in the short term. For 5A1, we expect 15 more countries to submit data very soon. And by the end of next year, probably 122 countries will have reported. Reporting has been quite good in Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. But recently it's been picking up in different regions in Central Asia, in specific parts, other parts of Asia and Europe. But then there's difficulties in other regions, the Pacific Islands, the Caribbeans, North Africa. So there's some regions where it's particularly difficult, and not for a lack of trying. And North and Western Europe and North America, some of these countries are really refusing to report. So our efforts this year are focused on some Asian regions and completing the reporting in Central Asia. Next slide, please. And Veronica, over to you. Thanks.
I thought I was going to talk about 5A1, but Regina is on the floor to talk about 142, I think, because this is about 142 and their plans.
Okay. Yes, hi. Yes, let me jump in here. I'm Regina from GLTN. So yeah, so far this is the graph of the status of reporting from the 1.42. We do expect originally, officially in the UNSD, there are 33 countries that have reported. We do expect another, I think, additional 43 countries this year. So that would be, we'll reach 58 countries. That's the expectation by the end of the year, and an additional 54 countries or so that are that have responded, that have plans to respond to report in the following years. Again, so in regards to geographic representation, is much more advancing in Africa, where there is, of course, more intense land tenure project. In the case of Latin America, there are just an important note is that the indicator measures both rural and urban land. So it implies all population, for which this reason when the information is sourced for the indicator 5 from agricultural surveys, is not a good source for the indicator. So there's one of the challenges, of course, is as well the different challenges of land tenure that are in rural areas, agricultural land, versus what is land tenure, the manifestations of land tenure in urban areas. But at the just want to just to close that while progress has been slow, it is progressing. The indicator at the end of the measures governance, how the capacity of the governments as a proxy to actually administer and manage land tenure systems. So as any governance system, any changes both in implementation and in reporting, it takes its own rhythm when it's country-led and not so many resources are available. So with that, I pass over.
Slide, please. And perhaps the next,
Yes.
Veronica, that it's more visible. Thanks.
Yes. About SDG indicator 551, as you can see, as we said before, we had 49 countries reporting in 2023. That increased a lot in the last couple of years. So I think we saw big advancements in the last 2 or 3 years. We started with 10 countries in 2020. And I have to say that this is an issue that is not easy, because collecting data to calculate this indicator, both 581 and 142, it's not easy and it's expensive, and we need official data. I mean, we can calculate it temporarily with third-party data, like Prindexes and like FAO does it with SDG indicator 212. But that's momentarily, and to publish that data, we need to get the country's approvals as well. It's not, because the way that the SDGs have been set is not for the custodian agencies to go and collect data and publish it. It has to be a common work with the countries. So results. We have 49 countries, and as you can see in this graph, results are different for different countries. We have countries that land tenure, secure tenure is high for both men and women. Some that is high for men but not for women, and some that is not very high for either of them. We see that we have about 10 countries where the gap, there is no gap, we could say. If the difference between the land ownership between men and women is less than 10%, we can say that is more or less level. However, for all the other countries, there is a gap, and for some countries that gap is very big, is over above 40 percentage points. So here in the dots, you can see the percentage of women in red and of men in blue that own the percentage of the agricultural population. These are people that live in agricultural household. That means that depends on agriculture for their livelihood. And the percentage of women that have secure lands in the red dots. And then we see in the bars the gender gaps. In green is when the percentage of women is larger, and in red when the percentage is bigger for men. So I think these results are telling a clear story. There is a lot of were to be done by our team in assisting the countries to measure this indicator, because they are not easy. You have to first have either household surveys that have an agricultural module or an agricultural survey to include or adapt the questions to collect the information to measure the indicator. So far, we only have one country that said that they weren't going to collect this data because of the political sensitivity of it. The rest, they are keen on working on it. We get requests from countries to work on it. The problem is that agricultural or household surveys are expensive, and it's not easy to collect the data. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we nearly done, Muriel?
Sure, we can quickly go over the last few slides. So this graph is just to show you that we're trying to look at the correlation between the legal frameworks and the statistical data, which is currently still a bit difficult because there's limited overlap between 5A1 and 5A2. But this graph shows you that for the 30 countries we have available, the correlation is weak. And this can be due to a wide variety of factors, including social norms, but also, yeah, so we're analyzing this data, and we hope that maybe next year there will be more overlap between the different SDGs, so that more analysis can be done. Next slide, please. So we can, I think there's no need to go into the benefits of reporting on the land SDGs at great length, but I just want to highlight here that we are with SDG 5A2 really embedding the work in ongoing policy reform processes, and this we see that it's on the rise, whether it's for land policies, gender policies, or related land factors in other development policies. We get a huge number of demands, more. It's really increasing, and we see exactly these factors that Mr. De Schutter highlighted. Know that it's very difficult to strike a balance between investments and green carbon emissions and foreign investment and the protection of the small-scale farmers. And this is why it's really important that we collaborate, and civil society participates in consultations and policy reform processes, but also the custodians feed into these programs. Next slide, please. Well, this I don't need to explain. Next slide, please. Yes, so this is our last slide. So what are the potential actions to improve reporting? I think this will be more of interest to this audience. And this focuses only on two key players. No, it's focused on what do the governments do and the custodians, because FAO and UN Habitat and the World Bank obviously have to prioritize the official reporting process. This does not mean that we do not see a very important role for civil society and all other actors. I don't need to explain exactly, but so governments are supposed to lead the process. For 5A2, we do have political sensitivity because this involves also reporting on marriage laws and succession laws that in many regions cannot be touched. And then the resources and the lack of available resources is a key challenge for governments and for the custodians. So we have to collect this data with minimal means. And all the rest, I think we can explain if there's any questions. Thanks, over.
Thank you very much, FAO, and thank you also to GLT and UN Habitat for stepping in. Veronica, I was wondering which is the one country which said it's too politically sensitive to monitor and report on the gender gap.
I cannot say.
Yeah, I guess you can't say. But the ILC network would definitely like to target some of the advocacy in that direction. So thank you so much. That's extremely helpful. And I wonder, Muriel, if we could just come back to you with a quick question on your presentation in relation to the previous presentation. So you've explained clearly that the reporting on the SDGs needs to come from governments to custodian agencies. You've explained the difficulties of the paucity of data, although it is encouraging to see that it's expected over the next 1 and 2 years, those numbers will go up. But is there anything custodian agencies could do to encourage governments to refer, for example, to Prindex data, which uses established, agreed upon scientific methodologies to create data sets? Is there any role that FAO as a custodian agency could do to bring that in?
In a minute, I will give the floor to my colleagues, Regina and Veronica, because I think they're better placed to talk about the Prindex data. But for one, I want to highlight that we are, we've organized in the last year regional capacity building and awareness raising sessions, and we always try to involve all stakeholders. And also we reach out to UN Habitat, we reach out to Prindex, just like because we see the value of this data. Having said that, it needs to be acknowledged what it is, and it's different from the official data. And just the other day, I was discussing with Anna that we would continue in these efforts. Notably in Europe, there will be some dissemination and awareness raising sessions by Prindex where FAO will support it. For when it comes to the 5A1, so I can respond to the legal information, and then I will give my colleagues the floor. I absolutely agree that civil society or citizen-generated data is key, because this legal indicator focuses on a very limited number of proxies. It cannot capture all the nuances. So I think civil society has a key role to play, not only in all the things we know, like monitoring, advocacy, ensuring reforms are implemented, but also really in when we move forward, seeing, okay, there is the official reporting which captures certain elements, but key issues have been missed. So to miss the international comparable data, to bridge that, not to see, okay, this has been covered, but certain groups have been forgotten. So yes, I think that this citizen-generated data and third-party generated data is absolutely critical. Over to my colleagues, Veronica and Regina, if you want to.
Thank you. Veronica, Regina, 30 seconds each, if you'd like to add anything.
No, I want to say, yes, it can be done, but you have to done it like I say, FAO has done it for SDG indicator 212, and we also use the Gallup work poll, but the work started way before the SDGs. So it was the indicator there, it was the need to measure it, so that it started that way. In the sense for FAO, I mean, the SDG indicator for which FAO is custodian, the Prindex data that Malcolm presented is, it doesn't measure this indicator. So directly, I would say no. And also the 5A1 indicator has a particular population. It has to be the agricultural population, not just the rural population. So it's harder to do in these things like the Gallup work poll that only have 1,000 sample points per country. In most countries, in some countries they have more. So the answer is for 5A1, the answer is no. For 142, I leave Regina, but they collected the data with the preindex for part B of the indicator, so maybe.
Regina, would you like to add on perception data of 1.4.2?
No, let me add in fact on the other angle, and this is the one for the localization of the indicator. So this is more on the urban section, and this is where governments can support. Where governments can, when citizen data can work with local governments in the production of VNR reports. These are not necessarily national yet, and can allow for more flexibility. But again, is the national states or the local authorities who have to agree on the data.
Okay, thank you. We are going to hear about VNR reports in Latin America in a second. Malcolm, would you like to very quickly just rejoin on anything that Rafael said? Yeah.
Absolutely. Prindex does engage with a lot of governments and with a lot of with the 1.4.2 custodians, and we really have seen some great uptake. Some of the European countries have used it. We're having a validation workshop with the Kenya Bureau of Statistics coming up later. So Prindex is very actively engaged with this on 1.4.2 B, and will continue to be, and look forward to this big tent around really making the whole data ecosystem rich, so we can actually focus on the progress, not the measurement.
Thank you, Malcolm. That's encouraging to hear. Okay, we are doing really well on time. Thank you to the excellent timekeeping of the presenters. So we probably will have a bit of space at the end for questions. I invite you please to put questions in the chat, because we're not going to have the time to actually give the floor to people who would like to ask questions. So if you have questions, put them in the chat while we listen to the next two speakers, which are going to give us some perspectives from country level on VNRs, not VLRs, voluntary national reports. I'm learning new acronyms and new language. As a way of bringing citizen-led data into accompanied reporting by citizens that would accompany official reports. So we will start with Togo, and then we'll go over to Latin America. So with Togo, we are very privileged to have Dieudonné Kossi. He's a jurist and he's a jurist, and he is executive director of the Clinique d'Expertise in Togo. And very recently, he has been involved with a whole consortium of civil society organizations in Togo on using Landex, that is a set of indicators that ILC helps to bring together, that cut right across 10 different dimensions of land in the SDGs, to do an assessment of Togo. So Dieudonné, Landex was recently implemented in your country. Could you give us a background of how it was done and how the findings have been used or are expected to be used to engage with the government on land and with respect to the SDGs? Over to you, Dieudonné. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Michael.
Thank you very much, Michael. First of all, I'd like to thank Mariella and Abdu. I think this is the best place to thank them. I had the pleasure of working on this report. I think you know better than I do. For us, it's the fourth time that our government made this report available on the progress of the SDGs and the implementation of the SDG linked to land. And it's very important that in the Togo ILC, in partnership with the ILC, to carry out an alternative assessment in order to have the elements that confirmed through the population. So internally, the report we drew up draws from different databases. So the world database on follow-up on land of the ILC, Landex, Prindex, and the presentation was already made, but also the political engagements of Togo. And you know also the national report of Togo on the SDGs allowed us to produce our report that, of course, also considered the standpoint of the populations. Actually, there are two target groups that helped us in assessing and in making the report. First, we carried out a first focus group discussion with the women groups in the 5 regions, and then a second focus group with family farmers. And so, generally speaking, one should say that the report, the national report of Togo, put the focused on the different on many different aspects. For instance, as to SDG 1 in Togo, there has been evolutions that were quite significant, especially with respect to the poverty index, national poverty rate that went from 55.1% to 45.1% between 2015 and 2019, and then the size of the population, adult population with land rights has evolved with a difference of 5 percentage points. For instance, we think we progressed and we were somehow champions in Western Africa about women's access also to decision making and control. And the report also highlights that the fact of Togo, despite their reforms, that legally speaking and also practically speaking, so the progress that has been recorded in the field, that we have protected the land rights of women, and other reforms also linked to securing land. So the report shows that there's there are some drawbacks and some aspects where Togo should still work on and make huge efforts. So for instance, I would give you an example on SDG 1. Despite all the effort made by Togo, and I'd like to remind that based on the data available, Landex data, the women are having a document proving their ownership, land ownership, amounts to 62%, which is higher than for men. But the report highlights that the documented land rights, also what we have collected through women and also focus groups, so land rights are not sufficiently guaranteed yet. And it was important, especially for women, because the focus group showed some problems, continuous problem for access of women to property and agricultural, women's access to agricultural land. And of course, we will not have enough time to talk about this, but there's some insecurity with respect to the exploitation of land. So there should be a security guaranteed for women. And as to SDG 2, the report shows that even if Togo has some good scores, generally speaking, the score of Togo is 80.90%. But there are some some gaps to be filled. For instance, we could support the family farming, because we have given aid to family farmers, but there are still some gaps, and this sector is not sufficiently supported with aid. So I think, generally speaking, there are recommendations that have been made in the report, and I would like to summarize them by saying, generally speaking, the report insists on the fact that land rights and women's land rights should be further protected, and also farmers and family farmers. It's important to strengthen transparency and also access to information, because when one talks to family farmers and also groups of women, you know and you hear that there's need for information, especially with respect to local communities and agricultural communities, and strengthening cooperation among different actors. So all those elements will allow the local national land coalition and others. Of course, we have already published the English version of the report, so you can go through it. But anyway, we could allow make some advocacy, envisaging some advocacy activities. There will be a forum. We will officially present the report. There will be ministry, public authorities attending. So I think this is a very important gate, and also a very important advocacy moment to engage with the different actors. And I think that the NGOs and civil society organizations that are members of the platform will use that information for their advocacy activities, but also to put in place progress, and also increase the awareness of actors, local actors, also local authorities, as they are very close to the actors in the field. Maybe I exceeded my time, but anyway, the time
Monsieur Cossi, c'était très intéressant. Je crois un très bon exemple de comment est-ce qu'on utilisait les données, l'évidence.
Thank you very much. It was extremely useful. It's a good example on how to use the data, and also produce recommendations for governments, and also engage with local authorities on the major gaps that are there, and how one can work together for a better future. So thank you very much. Thank you to you, and also to...
And we'll also be hearing a similar story from civil society organizations, members of ILC in Latin America. Daniela Savid works for Fundación Plurales, and has been part of several different countries in LAC who've come together to produce CSO reports on the progress of land indicators. Those countries are Guatemala, Nicaragua, Colombia, Argentina, and Brazil. So Daniela, over to you to please explain to us how civil society organizations in Latin America have used these reports, have developed and used them, and how effective have they been in doing just what we've heard in Togo, in opening up engagement with the government on where there is a lack, a gap between aspiration and reality, and working together on how to close that gap. Over to you, and just a reminder that you can put any questions or comments in the chat, which we'll try and come to immediately after Daniela's presentation. We'll have time for 1 or 2 questions at maximum, so get in there quickly. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you, Mike. thank you for inviting me in this important event.
Bueno, cuando empezamos a trabajar junto con las iniciativas, con las coaliciones nacionales por la tierra de la ILC en América Latina para el monitoreo de los ODS a nivel nacional, encontramos un punto común que era la falta de información, como ya lo hemos dicho en varios momentos. Pero no solo la falta de información en cuanto a datos estadísticos, sino también información que estuviera enmarcada o alineada a los ODS. Empezamos cuando ya habían pasado 5 años de que los estados asumieron el compromiso con la Agenda 2030 y las primeras revisiones voluntarias de nuestra región, las llamadas informes de primera generación, solo 2 países incluyeron datos sobre información de alguna meta que incluye el tema de la tierra. Es por eso que se decidió empezar a recolectar información y generar nuevos informes que hablaran en clave de ODS y la importancia de la tierra como base fundamental para el crecimiento y la erradicación de la pobreza. La siguiente, por favor. Así como empezamos a desarrollar gran cantidad de informes que hoy usamos para muchas de las acciones en nuestra iniciativa. Los informes fueron Landex, luego se hicieron Landex junto con ODS, y también realizamos informes que analizan la implementación de los ODS con la metodología del Momentum Group con la ayuda de Diana. Para quien no sabe, Landex es una herramienta que monitorea los avances en la situación de la gobernanza de la tierra a nivel nacional. Y en su primera ronda de recolección en América Latina se obtuvieron datos completos para 8 países y datos parciales para 5 países del Caribe. Además, la iniciativa Tierra y ODS realizó 9 informes de 9 países donde se analizaron qué planes y programas implementan, cuáles son las reformas legales que impulsaron después del 2015 y un análisis de los datos oficiales para 4 metas que mencionan la tierra de manera literal, el 1.4, el 2.35a y 13.5.5. Además se realizaron 3 informes híbridos, que son los que llamamos Landex junto con ODS, para Guatemala, Argentina y Nicaragua. Lo más importante de esta cantidad de información que se generó y se sistematizó es que se incluye una serie de recomendaciones y aportes de las organizaciones que integran las coaliciones nacionales por la tierra, así como ejemplos, casos de éxito y también algunas denuncias. Toda esta información junta y así organizada no se encontraba en ningún lugar y genera un aporte clave si queremos entender cuáles son los cuellos de botella que tenemos en nuestra región y también si queremos explicar por qué las metas que incluyen la tierra, como el 1.4, el 5A o el 2.3, no se van a cumplir para el 2030 en América Latina, según los datos de la CEPAL. Pero bueno, ¿para qué se usó toda esta información? Que era la pregunta de Mike. Los informes y los datos los hemos utilizado como herramientas. La siguiente, por favor. Primero, para acciones de incidencia, se envió información a los estados y a sus oficinas de planificación o a la que implemente los ODS. La información se envió con el objetivo de que los funcionarios agreguen información a sus revisiones voluntarias, den respuestas a las preguntas o simplemente se ponga en evidencia la falta de datos actualizados. Por ejemplo, mañana Ecuador hace su revisión voluntaria y en su informe utiliza datos del censo agropecuario que tiene un atraso de 24 años. Estos datos no son representativos y lo afirma la Coalición Nacional por la Tierra en Ecuador. También usamos los datos para acciones de movilización, sensibilización y cabildeo durante los eventos vinculados a la Agenda 2030, llevando información a eventos paralelos o en posicionamientos y preguntas al Estado. Por otro lado, algunas CNT con la información en la mano de estos informes pudieron realizar campañas de comunicación, diálogos con otros sectores de la sociedad civil que creemos que es muy importante que quienes trabajan por la gobernanza de la tierra puedan dialogar con otros colectivos y así poder aunar esfuerzos y tener mejores impactos. Específicamente con Landex, los datos se utilizaron en rondas de prensa y en intervenciones en sesiones de convenciones de Naciones Unidas. También se preparó un reporte paralelo para CEDAW y un reporte paralelo para DES. Y en el caso del informe de Guatemala fue presentado en el Foro Político de Alto Nivel. Bueno, si bien los procesos son lentos, reafirmamos que este es el camino y de a poco hemos logrado algunos resultados. Con toda esta información producida y recopilada, se ayudó a instalar el tema en algunos espacios. En las sesiones tanto oficiales como paralelas, se pudo colocar el tema de la gobernanza de la tierra, las mujeres rurales, la agricultura familiar, los defensores y defensoras ambientales, temas que no estarían presentes si no fuesen por los miembros de ILC y estos informes que incluyen este tipo de información, que a menudo buscamos otros informes de otras y no aparecen. También se logró tomar contacto cercano con las oficinas de implementación de los ODS y que se reconocieran y tomaran los aportes de las coaliciones nacionales por la tierra. En un país se logró que se incorpore una nueva meta dentro de los compromisos asumidos y en otro se reconoció dentro de la revisión voluntaria el aporte de la Coalición Nacional por la Tierra como una red que trabaja para el cumplimiento de los ODS. No solo vemos la importancia de tener informes para mejorar el ecosistema de los datos, sino también los necesitamos para movilizar las demandas de lo que está pasando en los territorios y llevarla a quienes toman decisiones. Es necesario que las organizaciones campesinas e indígenas, las mujeres y juventudes puedan llegar a estos espacios, porque lo que dicen nuestros informes es que la mayoría de los casos no son tenidos en cuenta para la elaboración o el diseño de políticas públicas y probablemente por eso fracasan. Es frustrante escuchar cada vez más a los gobiernos de América Latina agradecer al sector privado por su aporte y no considerar a la sociedad civil como un actor que tiene capacidad y debe ser involucrado. Por eso necesitamos más informes, más data que no sea solo la oficial o hegemónica, sino también que ponga en valor los datos ciudadanos o territoriales, como se mencionó anteriormente, que sí recogen la realidad profunda de nuestros territorios, como por ejemplo cuál es el porcentaje de parcelas conducidas por mujeres que aún no tienen título, cuántos defensores o defensoras han sido asesinados, cuántos programas y fondos se dejó de destinar para la agricultura familiar, o a qué se destina la mayor cantidad de tierras en nuestra región, sea alimentar animales o alimentar personas. Estos informes muestran que no solo tenemos datos para aportar, sino también propuestas sobre cómo mejorar los indicadores que cada vez marcan más retroceso en América Latina, que según FAO sigue siendo la región más desigual en cuanto a la distribución de tierras, y también lo reafirmaba Oliver anteriormente. En este panorama, y para finalizar, los invito a seguir trabajando para fortalecer el ecosistema de datos, reconociendo el papel vital de los datos territoriales y ciudadanos. Estos datos no solo complementan la información oficial, sino que también proporcionan una perspectiva más justa y equitativa. Es crucial garantizar la integración efectiva de estos dos tipos de datos en los informes y en las políticas relacionadas con la gobernanza de la tierra en América Latina, y así avanzar significativamente a un desarrollo sostenible sin dejar a nadie atrás de verdad. Gracias, Mike.
Gracias, Daniela, y felicidades por el trabajo de la plataforma. We're going to have to move on quickly. We don't have any questions, but I would like to just come back to each of the panelists, and I'm going to give them a question that I'll ask them to answer within a minute. But just to reflect that we've gone on this journey over the last hour and 20 minutes, from getting a picture of what's actually happening in terms of demand for land and unequal competition for land, and what some of the implications of that are, alongside up to now a very poor record in reporting by states on the land-related indicators of the SDGs that they adopted 8 years ago. But we've also had some reason for hope. We've had some excellent presentations, both from the large, ambitious Prindex project that gives us really consistent data across very many countries, through to some quite encouraging indications from FAO in terms of those numbers going up by intentions of countries to report on the land indicators, and some really I found inspiring stories from civil society coming together at the national level and collecting data and using that data as an entry point for engaging and dialoguing with their own governments. So on the one hand, many challenges. On the other hand, some reason for hope in terms of what you can do over the next 6 years. So coming back, and I'm going to start with you, Olivier. If you could give us, if you could just pull out one thing that we need to really dedicate ourselves to over the next 6 years, regarding what the land indicators in the SDGs call us to do. And when I say we, the speakers have all been from either the UN system or civil society, in other words, partners to governments. So not necessarily a call to governments, but a call to to UN agencies or to civil society organizations in different countries. What's the one thing, in your view, above all else, we should dedicate ourselves to? What would your answer be, Olivier?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, and thank you to the presenters for very stimulating overviews of what in their respective regions is taking place. I think the one addition I would like to make with great humility is that the kind of monitoring we have with the high-level political forum of the SDGs implementation is only one of the tools we can use to put pressure on governments to deliver on the SDGs. Another, I think, important and neglected tool is simply the apparatus of human rights monitoring. In early 2023, 1 year ago, the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights under the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights adopted its general comment number 26 on land and economic, social and cultural rights, in which the committee very clearly highlighted the duties under international law of states with respect to access to land, to respect for land rights, to the protection of the rights of land users against encroachment, linking access to land to rights such as the right to food, to an adequate standard of living, or the right to housing. And I think bringing the human rights bodies, monitoring mechanisms, including judicial mechanisms, into this picture is important, because the SDGs are not self-fulfilling. They need to be much more carefully monitored, but also implemented by using the tools we have to put pressure on governments. And I think the links between human rights and SDGs in the area of land are probably underused and underestimated for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And of course, human rights law doesn't expire in 2030. It continues, and so that's a much more long-term and long-standing effort that we need to be accountable to. Thank you so much, Olivier. Diana, over to you. Where should we put, what one thing should we put our focus on over the next 6 years?
This is all very helpful. I'd say we also can get out of the more enclosed SDG in even UN and government systems and put more information on the media. I'm just building on the example Daniela just mentioned, right? Why not make this something that more people can be aware of and through their own channels can put pressure on? So
thank you. Getting out of our bubbles and getting it out there. Thank you very much, Malcolm.
Yeah, I would just come back to that same point, that really citizen mobilization and advocacy is ultimately the thing that's going to drive governments and drive and making some of these wider linkages, human rights, women's rights. The ILC partner Espacio Feminista in Recife, Brazil is a great example. I think where a feminist organization concerned with women's livelihoods has ended up certifying a big swath of previously unrecognized women's rights, and has taken that agenda forward with local and regional government. And I think we need lots more examples like that to get the leverage and the momentum we're looking for in this field.
Thanks, Malcolm. I'll go over to FAO. We can get one of our FAO representatives. I'll let you decide who's going to step up for FAO.
Go ahead, Marijan.
I can do it. It will be slightly repetitive. So I fully agree. So we need to really strengthen the narrative, and the main element there is the human rights focus and the benefits for the governments of being inclusive of right holders. And I also agree with Malcolm that highlighting good practices and success stories can be very inspirational, and that we absolutely need to collaborate. So it's not either the custodians or civil society or knowledge institutions or human rights institutes. It's all of us. So let's make more noise. Thanks.
Thank you, Muriel. That was a clever way of getting 4 points in for the value of 1. Thank you so much. Let's go over to Togo and Monsieur Kossi. Je te donne la parole.
Non, merci beaucoup, Michael. Je crois que s'il y a un élément important, je crois, sur lequel on doit vraiment mettre un focus sur les prochaines années, c'est vraiment l'accès des femmes rurales, en fait, à la terre. Parce que vous savez qu'en Afrique, la femme reste un soutien important, en fait, au développement au niveau local. Et je pense qu'il n'y a pas de développement possible sur les prochaines années en Afrique de l'Ouest sans l'implication réelle, en fait, des femmes et sans une appropriation réelle des droits fonciers de la femme. Donc, je m'arrête là en vous remerciant une fois de plus pour l'opportunité.
Thank you, Dujone. I think many ILC members would agree entirely. Women's land rights is right at the center of our struggles. And the last word to Daniela. Over to you, Daniela.
Bueno, muy de acuerdo con todo lo que dijeron anteriormente y creo que es importante seguir garantizando la participación de las mujeres campesinas indígenas, de los agricultores familiares en este espacio y que ellos hablen por su propia voz y no por terceros. Si no estamos en estos espacios, nadie más va a colocar estos temas o estas denuncias, así que hay que seguir trabajando en esa línea, creo.
Thank you. So not only listening to stakeholders, but listening to the rights holders themselves first and foremost. This has been a really amazing panel. I would like to thank so much our incredible panelists. It's been very, very interesting indeed. Thank you for taking the time, each of you, and for all that you've contributed to a very interesting discussion. This discussion doesn't end here. It feeds into the work that we do at ILC. We're right now planning for our work plan for the next triennium, and this is very helpful in us getting a sense of how we can be a link to these different streams and bring them together and bring the power of the 300 members of ILC behind our common efforts. So thank you to all of you who joined us. Thank you to Rukhsana, who worked very hard to put this together, and thank you to the translators who have tirelessly translated for us. Thank you, everybody. I wish you a good evening, a good night, a good morning, wherever you are.